Okay, let's resume this last round table, which will be devoted to confronting, well, the idea at least was to analyze our reality of death, horror, blood, to at the same time be able to rebel against it and rethink not only our thoughts but also our emotions, our bodies, to keep thinking in the possibility of how culture can transport us to these other imaginaries. Let's resume now, because for us, Camus, it's this guide pointing at the north for us. And now in this latest conversation we have Achille Mbembe, this great thinker who is my light, the light for many of us, a great thinker in these hard, complex times, shedding some light on contemporary matters. And thank you very much, Mr. Mbembe, for being here today. And Anne Prouteau is also here with us. She's not only our sister in this project, but the one also shedding this Camusian light. She's the president of the Camus Association here. So thanks to them, we've felt this great energy. So we are really looking forward to listening to their words and to talk about the need of this profession, or this all the ideas that Camus shared with us. So you have the floor. Good evening. Can you hear me okay? Good evening, everyone. Good afternoon. I feel really happy. I feel really every year I feel so grateful and happy to enjoy the richness of our exchanges. It's a great present to have Achille. We met each other today at noon, so it's been a great pleasure for me. Today I'm feeling somehow like Alfredo mentioned this morning, who unfolded this blue box that opened his eyes, his imaginaries. So thanks to all of you. This is a little bit what's happened to me, so thank you, thank you. I will begin by talking about this citation of this man's work or man's profession. So let's put it in context. This quotation that we know well, this faire son métier d'homme. Camus had the idea of all these poetic images. This quote sometimes has been quoted in The Plague, but also later in a L'Express article in 1955 called actually Le Métier d'Homme. In the first apparition, in The Plague, the reference is part of the revolt. Camus begins with this absurdity concept instead of what could have been an invitation of towards the death or dislike. And this is what he calls the rules of life. He wonders if life has no sense. It has some value for Camus. And he invites us to revolt by Dr. Rieu at The Plague. And the characters are no longer strangers to each other, fighting amongst these plagues. And even if victory is uncertain, the battle can make happen this human tenderness. So this temporary finite world with all these. We wonder how we can live and do this man's work. The plague is an illustration of this. In this allegoric representation of the plague being the bad, the oppression, Camus decides, and this is original, to allow different perspectives. He creates different characters, and they will be faced against this plague and will give a specific journalist, someone white collar, and of course a doctor, Dr. Rieu, who is the anonymous narrator of this chronicle. The doctor will compromise his forces, and he says to use the right words, to call things by its names, and the plague, when it has been identified. And at the end of chapter 2, Doctor, he talks with Rambert, the journalist who was in Paris to find out about their living conditions. And Rambert actually, in this moment in the novel, considers the selfishness, and he wonders whether it's really worth sacrificing oneself towards an idea. And I cite the plague. He's actually right indeed, because what Rambert is going to do is to abandon this village abandoned by the plague, to join the woman he loves. But then afterwards, it's necessary for me to say that it's not about selfishness, it's about being honest. It could be something that makes you laugh, but the only way to fight, to battle the plague, is honesty. What is honesty, says Rambert? I don't know what it is, generally speaking, but in my case, I know that it consists in doing my work, my profession. So it's not about being happy, but to do your work, a man's work, which is whatever it is, whatever it takes. And it's difficult to define honesty, but we understand that it's being based on the fact that you do your work in a proper manner, whether you're a doctor, to play your role. And for Rieu, it means to reduce arithmetically the pain in a rational manner, but it means that he tries to help people, because life is sacred. He doesn't want his patients to die, of course, and to save the heart. This Camusian formula, according to what we have experienced this morning, it does make sense. We also hear it in his voice, this man's work or this profession, to do it for someone else. It's the child to be able to be close, as Rideau says. And Rieu, he's not rational like Jacqueline says, this great specialist. It's a sort of moral instinct that thrives you to devote to it, to heal or preserve what it could be saved by the man. It's also about doing your man's work, joining forces with others. The plague thus shows us a community of humans who progressively abandon their selfishness to fight together. Most of them tried. Actually, even the religious, he joins this group, the priest, Dr. Rieu stops being ironic, and he begins being ironic when the priest actually gets involved. Being locked in the city, in this lockdown, it's the same time, and an important detail of the novel is that at the beginning we know it's the 14th of April, the day where Rio sees the rats, but quickly we don't talk about the usual calendar. This is no longer used, and time under the plague is calculated in weeks because the same time is shared by every single citizen. So this task of mankind becomes a collective one. And Sylvia was talking about community in the previous roundtable. And even we see that personal aspirations, even though they are legitimate, should be forgotten. Rimbaud wanted to abandon the city to meet the woman he loves, and afterwards, after a lot of things going on, he manages to leave the city, and whenever it's possible, I quote Rambert, something shameful could come with being happy on your own, and maybe he shouldn't be loving or wishing to go with her. So this surge of happiness can be respected, but the truth cannot be done without a fight against evil. So in order to do this man's work, it's necessary to use these, like the bathe scene between Rabier and his Antaro to celebrate their friendship. So it's funny to see them tell each other being friendship, and in order to celebrate our friendship, we could bathe together. And afterwards, after this, and having taken a rest, they can continue fighting against the plague. This scene is not something happening just, we use this Camusian thought. The time devoted for this takes importance to the time devoted to battle. A man must fight in order to defend victims. A man fighting and who's still loving this woman. Why do we live? Why do we fight? And after this scene, the relationship with the world, the skies, the sea, it's also important for Camus because it's not only a backdrop, it's part of our life on earth, of our battles. Let's remember that in these going and coming from these landscapes, they enlighten, they lit up our strengths. I will quote when Camus talks about this invincible summer. In order to there is a long vindication of justice that this death allowing him to be born. In order to impede justice, it's necessary to have a source of happenings departing from injustice and going back to the battle with this battle actually being won, and this scene of the bath and beauty being part of this man's work. So it's about having your feet on the ground and being lucid, being aware, as the prologue of the plague says. So while the masses are happy, the doctor is still vigilant because he's aware that the plague could come back. So it's a victory, but it's only a provisional victory over death and over evil. So here again, we must be prudent. And do this man's work is part of this long chain of human beings who will come after us, the future generations. So we must keep being humble. Camus was aware at different periods of his work. in La postérité du soleil, the posterity of the sun, that he wrote with René Char, and that was published posthumously after his death. I believe that some after us will receive in this land the first son. They will fight, they will know the death and love. And this longing for life is adorable. If I could imagine that man's work was reserved for an elite, we could mention a fragment of the plague that extends this concept to everyone. Here you will see that manual work is put in value. I quote, "The doctor opened the window and the noise of the city came back. We could hear this noise from the city. It was the certainty of everyday's work task. The rest were non-important movement and sounds. The most important thing was to do his work properly." This fragment let us think about L'Express article of the 14th of May 1955, titled "The Man's Work," that I mentioned. And I would like to quote the two first sentences. The coincidence of two trips allowed me to meet with a couple of weeks of difference, men who were happy with what they did. It was weird, but they were French. Camus was very humorous, actually. In this Architect, which is pretty short, he finds or talks about these young architects who were working after the earthquake in Orléansville in September 1954, and in a second trip where he met some other young archaeologists doing excavation work in Argos. He was touched by the vitality, enthusiasm, and he said, I quote, "Far away from our works, our communities, either empty or destructive, they exert a creative task, a man's profession." And Camus, end of quote, said, this really has nothing to do with an effort of a nation to gain most of the citizens having the feeling that they're doing a proper task, that they're doing their duty, their proper job. And Camus thought that this companionship amongst these workers has almost disappeared, because when we talk about companionship amongst colleagues' works, sheds light on the idea of happiness, you know. He'd also worked with colleague, fellow journalists, in the theater, because it was a collective workplace. And let's finish. For Camus, this man's work, his own, was confused with these big language building activity, as he liked to say. So building this language of becoming an artist. This is the denomination that Camus preferred, being an artist. Was it simple? No. He never actually hid his recurrent hesitations. As he wrote to Albert Marquet, "I advance in the same way as artist as I do as a man." So he established an intrinsic connection between his human experience and what he got from his writing. And in the preface of L'Envers à l'Endroit in 1958, he expresses actually this never-ending surge where he likes, and I love this expression, the balance between what you are and what you say, a supreme condition to ride the work, the piece of what he's dreaming of. So the expression that I think to be a really nice synonym of what it seems to do your proper man's work, with all the difficulty that this entails with this Sisyphean work. As Joyce, the great writer, said, what touches me is not actually the work, it's the fact of doing the enterprise, accepting it. So actually himself, Camus, it's pretty touching when he considered before his death, and even though all his works being published, he said that his work was not finished. He actually said that it had not started. So to do a man's work, it's not to be too satisfied, in the sense that to look tirelessly, to keep looking and looking for the just balance between the ethics, as we said this morning, between what we are and what we do. Thank you very much.
Alors, je voudrais vraiment dire merci à
Well, I would like to thank everybody,
ceux et celles qui nous ont rassemblés ici.
all those who are responsible for us being here. Since this morning, I'm living a very important moment. It seems that we're taking some respite. And I have the impression, maybe not that I'm born again, but I have the impression that something is carrying me. I'm being carried by something that is greater than me. And all the interventions this morning, all these forms of intelligence that have gathered here to share reflections, all the reflections that have been shared since the beginning, all of this is an immense celebration, not only to the soul, but also the manifestation of what Camus would call make your job, make your work as a human, I would say. And I'm very happy to meet Anne. I have the impression that we have got to know each other for a long time. Actually, I have read some of Anne Prouteau's works. And yesterday night, I was reading this article in the Express magazine, which was entitled "To do a man's work, to do the man's work as a human being." And I'm also very happy that you have brought us back to the topic, to Camus, and to his text and his words. There are certain things that you have put forward. It's the invitation to revolt, but also the rejection of resignation. The fact that victory was certain, victory was uncertain and cannot be guaranteed. The fact also that through this relentless work, there's a form of the heart which emerges, and it's the heart of a man. It's a man's heart, and it's characterized by tenderness, and also the love for men. So one can wonder, where are we in all of this today? Where is the love of the world after having heard what we heard during the day?
très important, ce que tu as souligné, et qui a trait au
I also think
création.
what you underlined is very
Mais aussi
important
pour nous
regarding
autres
the efforts of
venons de cette partie du
creation.
monde,
You know,
souvent
for all those of us who come from
condamnés à la
this
marge,
side of the world, who is doomed to live at the margin, you know, this notion of the reserve of life, a kind of basin of life. All of this at a moment where there are great forces which are aligned in order to drain these forms of life, in order to exhaust these forms of life. So the thing is, how to handle all of this, how to cope with all of this, and how to make the right steps to reconstitute all of this. And to feel in a certain way that you are strong again to start things over. Because in certain countries where we live, nothing is taken for granted. Everything is just temporary, and you're always led to start again, over and over again. So where are you going to find these forms of life? How are you going to feed these forms of life? How are you going to put them at the service of a kind of vital chain where human beings are part of a very large community where there are ancestors, of course, but there are also those who are going to succeed us, as well as animals and plants and water and trees and so on and so forth. So all of this in a symbiotic relationship that allows to renovate, to renew the whole of creation. So this gift of life, or this debt or life that precedes us and that exists, well, whether we want it or not, whether we admit it or not, I think that all of this is paramount for all those who are trying to claim for Camus' name or trying to remind the name of Camus. And I think that, well, this name is still current nowadays. It's undeniable. And I'm not here trying to give a response to what you were saying, but I'm just trying to widen up my reflections. And I would like to share with you 4 or 5 points that I will not have the time to develop. Otherwise, we'll stay here till tomorrow morning. Well, why not? Somebody's saying.
Alors, le point porte justement sur le thème qui nous a réunis et que tu as essayé
the main point is actually
remettre sur la table.
The topic that gathers us here, and actually you were reading some excerpts of Camus' text about the fact of rethinking the world. I'd like to say that there are different ways to rethink the world, and on the basis that, well, what kind of form this would take today, what kind of form this profession of a man would be, what it would look like, because you said it very well. There is this relentless work of hominization in terms of, you know, our species with regards to other species. And I think that there are different ways to do so. For example, there's a way to rethink the world from a position from a hanging position. And this hanging position, or this position where we would overlook, this means, or this takes for granted that the world belongs to us, that we are the owners of the world, if we are taking this position of overlooking. And then it means that the world and its wealth and its resources is there at our service, and that we can use all of that without limits. And then the price to pay to use that ad libitum would be paid by somebody else, but not by us. I think that this way of rethinking the world is always with us. And this is the essential mark of our modernity. So I'd like to suggest here that there is another way to rethink the world. And this way of rethinking the world is related to the experience of those who were always at the borders of the world. And those who were subject to or submitted to others, those who were subject to violence in a disproportionate way, the violence of the world, because the world is violent. The world was violent and it remains violent. And we can say here, without exaggeration, that this was the case for many centuries. It was the case for Africa for centuries.
Relu d'un point de vue camusien.
And I think that if we read this from the approach of Camus, the African experience allows to throw upon the world a kind of crude light. So then it means that the Palestinian experience, for example, and we're talking about this morning, this would be the same experience as many other experiences that we've had at the end of last century. And this experience allows to place a judgment upon the world. And why? Well, just because Africa is the stone from which the evangel stems, and it's a kind of lake that was built by the builders, and we can imagine as well the contours of a kind of politics of resistance. Camus talks about revolt, but I would also like about a policy of resilience. I mean, the fact of always starting again. And it's also the policy of hope, but hope not as an abstract concept, but rather as an inexhaustible energy. And this inexhaustible energy is what makes it powerful when we talk about Africa in the world. And this is the case. So I think that today invoking the name of Camus is somehow taking the risk or accepting to witness. So accepting the risk of witnessing, for instance, thinking about Palestine, and thinking about this, and thinking about those who are actually submitted to the weight of violence in an unjust manner, but Obviously, some people in the world do not want to hear the call, they do not want to hear the plight, they do not want to hear the crying of orphans, the crying of innocence.
En fait, non seulement elles ne veulent pas entendre.
Actually, not only do they refuse to hear that cry, but also they would mobilize all the excuses, they will manipulate the language, they will change the narrative and change the words and the drafting of the words. They're going to distort the images. And they're going to use force as well and brutality to suppress the truth, to make us believe that what we are witnessing does not exist, to make us believe that what we're seeing is different from what's going on. Today, we're talking about the language and the words which lie and kill. And they kill people, but they kill the truth as well. So in this affair of war against the truth, I think that this is something that Camus would like to fight if he was still alive. So why is it important to witness? Because in a context where instrumental reason makes substantive reason a single tool for destruction, well then witnessing would be the ultimate fashion of manifestation. Well, to manifest the truth, or at least the spirit of the truth. So, I think that finding the path towards this idea of truth, well, this is one of the main conditions to live in the planet and to reproduce life on the long term. And I would like now to finish with maybe 2 or 3 very short reflections. Now, I had the chance in previous years to get involved in many specific actions in Africa that aim at relaunching the democratic agenda in the continent. The democratic agenda. I'm referring here to the formulation of a project that goes beyond electoral democracy and that goes beyond procedures and that goes towards a substantive democracy and even substantial democracy, if I may say.
Tu m'as demandé qu'est-ce que ça veut dire.
And you were asking me how or through what.
Et je te répondais en disant
and I was thinking it's a democracy
s'attaque consciemment, méthodiquement et délibérément
that will attack methodically and deliberately
conditions matérielles sans lesquelles
a set of material conditions without which life is not possible. For instance, drinking water or food
les vêtements
or clothing, education,
lopin de terre,
some land, a piece of land,
libre des femmes,
also the freedom of speech for women,
etc., etc.
and other spaces for oneself and things like this, or access to a means of subsistence.
Le prix de la vie,
and of course, the price of life is the same for us.
Une dette de vie,
and a debt of life relates us all, even before we're born. And I would like to add that a democracy that
la question du sens
attacks the issue of the sense and the meaning, a democracy
qui réduit l'écart
that will reduce
aujourd'hui planétaire
the planetary gap between production activities and tools and production activities and symbols, because the distortion of language and the destruction of reason that is manifested in atrocities and in state crimes, and some of these state crimes have been denounced this morning. Well, all of this is very much the manifestation of this gap between the production of tools and the manifestation of symbols. And then there's this democracy that tackles with the great issue of the century. It's the exhaustion of the earth and the combustion of the earth. And all of this is question, and actually all of this is questioning the possibility for millions of people to have a decent kind of life. So this democracy would open the gate to a great reconciliation of humans, of beings, and actually humankind should be part of this, and it should start a symbiotic relationship with the rest of creators, with the rest of creation. And I think that this would be a form of life, and Camus was very much interested in democracy. And I think that this is a new way of reading Camus through these new regions of the world which have been condemned to living at the margin of the world. Thank you very much.
On a du temps encore. Moi, je voulais bien te poser, justement, te redonner.
I would really like to give you the floor again, because I find it amazing that you're here. You've spent a long period of and years of your life thinking, rethinking, writing, reflecting. You're also a professor at several universities. This that you are trying to say now, I guess the most important aspect for you as your human profession, your work, I wonder, could you let us know what you do? I love listening to you, how you are listening to the world, this cry for democracy, this. I have the impression that for you it's also priority, education is a priority, and that we could see a feasible future where education exists for everyone. Yes, indeed, because during several years we have been working on this very important task which is thinking in a critical manner, and also sometimes the deconstruction. It's a fundamental task because the moment we're living in, which is somehow characterized by an unprecedented digital world. We have never, as mankind, lived such a period with the mushrooming of artifacts, this temptation of answering to the great question of what is intelligence, with all these technological gadgets and this digital era and these anthropological mutations that this entails. We are witnessing the appearance of a new form of humans. It's not the 18th century human of the Enlightenment. It's a different word, different aspect, different human being. Coupled with its beast, with this perverse nature of this process, removing the brain to millions or hundreds of people. So this rearmament of the critical thinking by using any means and any element of intelligence, not only the scientific rational intelligence, but all we've seen right now. There's this, we have done, we have seen it with this singing, all these forms of intelligence, and this effort to mobilize all these forms of intelligence is crucial. And at the same time, not to be crushed by the immensity of this task, the feeling of defeat that plenty of us feel when we see this colossal magnitude of destruction happening, villages, human lives, these politics that are put in place, destroying the environment and destroying so many lives. We have talked about what's happened in the Mediterranean basin and all these things that have been misunderstood, that push us to feel this sense of defeat and this condition and the recreation of this commitment. In the African context, thus, the idea is to set the foundations, the innovation towards democracy, and to listen, re-listen to the communities, to step forward little by little, to keep looking far ahead, advancing in this path where people stand up on their own feet. So research, open research, which also translates into having learning communities. Before it was the teacher teaching the pupils, but now it's to learn with and amongst each other and using certain technologies, because plenty of them could be useful to free people. So this is the turning point. And I personally, with many of others I feel committed to.
On l'écoutera encore. Hein.
We want to listen to you. We want to keep doing so. Feel free.
Enfin bon, je veux juste dire quelque chose de
Well,
concernant le rôle de l'intellectuel.
regarding the role the intellectual plays, I guess that I really like this idea of learning together as a community. And the intellectual, I wonder, I guess it's not a term that you use often. You prefer the guardian of knowledge, or sometimes, no, in my writings I don't use intellectual. I prefer veilleur, the guardian. It's a nice expression. Take your time, yeah. My education was a Catholic one. I had to become a good man and a good father. I was taught by the Dominicans and Jesuits, and I had to go to Mass, to go to church. And I remember my grandma, who couldn't read or write. She'd never attended school. And when I was 10 or 12, she asked me to sit down and read some passages of the New Testament, of the Bible to her. So this is what I did. I could tell her by heart some images, passages of the Bible. So I learned with this classical education. So again, the role of this guardian and the source of the Christian Catholic education refers to the person who is in veil, or who is the guardian, who doesn't sleep, and also this figure of the guardian of knowledge, which is very present in St. John's Gospel, for example, and also the divine, which is more dangerous, which comes from this cosmovision in Africa, asking about time, because time itself reveals what's going to come. What we are waiting for is what should come, and which are the forces actually running towards this to happen, and the possibility. So the divine is what mediates between deciphering time and the acceleration of the processes of happening. And so if we join these two elements together, I believe that we can fully see to which point these figures generate different sources of forms of intelligence. So this eliminates or puts in critiques or eliminates this figure of the transcendental intellectual with the general specialized knowledge that he only or she can have, and then distributes to because he keeps authority and he's a role model. So we are in the project of reanalyzing these sources of life, and this is a concept that I believe, the guardian, that I believe to be. Well, I believe this is it. We've rethought the whole world. There's nothing else we need to rethink anymore. I don't know, maybe our audience would like to comment or ask something. Well, I believe that finally you've given us plenty of reserves to keep feeding our soul, our lives. So we hope that for a long time we shall be able to continue feeling our spirit, like Achille said, having this faith in this community of humans that together can overcome the violence in this world, as we saw this morning. And the idea of hope we have seen this year of I truly thank you, the two of you, and we shall enjoy a brief break now, and we shall give the awards afterwards with the